Sleeping Beauty was released in 1959 by Walt Disney Animation and is their 16th animated feature film and is based on the 1697 fairy tale by Charles Perrault, and the story follows as such. After being snubbed by the royal family, a malevolent fairy places a curse on a princess which only a prince can break, along with the help of 3 good fairies. Anytime the Walt Disney Company does a princess film, I'm going to be there. They're the stories that they're most known for, and they usually pull out all the stops for them. The 2 princess films I've reviewed previously have been some of the most visually dazzling and memorable animated films put to screen, and though I initially dismissed Snow White as just a good Disney film, it's still one I'm always thinking about. And Cinderella is just an absolute classic. And yet, there was one other Disney princess film that would be released during Walt's lifetime, and it was his most ambitious effort by far, and a massive bomb for the company. So, what happened? Well, stick around and you'll find out. As for Sleeping Beauty, this is a film I absolutely love. It's flawed in some respects, but it's imaginatively creative, beautiful, and really pushed the boundaries of an animated film in the same way the films of the Golden Age did. And thankfully, the film has been reevaluated and has reached a more classic status in the years since its release. However, it's never quite reached the popularity of the Disney films that came before or after, and I'm excited to finally be talking about it with you guys. Walt Disney has always been transfixed by fairy tales and built his later reputation on bringing these magical children's stories to life. And when he released Snow White in 1937 to critical and box office success, he, of course, would want to do it again, which is why by 1938, he was already planning a film based on the story of Sleeping Beauty. However, no major work would begin on it until well into the 1950s after the success of Cinderella. Disney wanted Sleeping Beauty to be the most impressive feature film the studio had made at that point, and the pinnacle of animation. And so that's why he stressed so much very early on that he wanted Sleeping Beauty to be different. And it's not hard to see just what Disney meant by simply watching the first moments of the film. And it's clear Sleeping Beauty truly wasn't like anything that came before. The artistry manages to blend the Disney look that is instantly recognizable with the shape of the characters, but with a heavy influence on medieval tapestry art. Sleeping Beauty ends up looking like those works of art brought to life. The angular shapes of characters, backgrounds, castles, and even trees. The colors are bright and lush, making it easily one of the most colorful Disney films ever made. And it's the focus on this art style that makes Sleeping Beauty stand out from the other works. They had to change how they made films previously to make this movie, and the effort, I think, pays off in the end. This was an extremely expensive film at the time, costing $6 million to produce, and due to a huge lack of marketing, expanding costs, and many theaters not even being equipped to show it, led to a disappointing box office gross at the time of $5.3 million. And just like that, the most ambitious Disney project made at the time killed the Disney princess film for 30 years. Eventually, due to re-releases, the film would turn a profit, and the mixed reception the film received at the time would only grow more positively over time. The film had many delays, and the use of CinemaScope harmed its box office potential on release, and like many Disney films before it, they used everything they had learned previously, such as live-action models to help provide movement, and I think it really turned out as well as it could have. Not to mention, Sleeping Beauty would end up being the final film film they would end up hand inking before moving to Xerox processing in their next film, 101 Dalmatians. Really, the star of the show is the film's beautiful animation. I really love the style they use because it gives the film its own unique flair, because they would never attempt something as ambitious as this for a very long time. And so there's something really special in experiencing this for that reason alone. But the way it pushes animation to its limits is something else entirely. One of my favorite moments in the entire film is the dance scene between Prince Phillip and Princess Aurora. In particular, a moment where their reflection is seen dancing in time with their actual physical appearances. That had to all be animated together, and it looks flawless. I mentioned too how well defined the colors are in the film because they make everything stand out so much more, from the forest scenes with the three fairies. But it's extremely impressive when we see locations such as Maleficent's castle, which looks like the perfect location for the mistress of all evil. But the colors especially, the mix of blacks and greens, work perfectly here. The film is just filled with such stunning imagery that it's crazy to imagine the work that went into it to make it flawless. The only thing that dampens the animation is the HD transfer of the film. And I don't know if this is a problem from the Blu-ray release or if it has persisted in earlier versions of the film, but there are very clear moments when the animation becomes very soft and blurry to the eye, particularly in the faces. It doesn't harm the film in any way, but it is a slight blemish to this beautiful looking movie. The animation for Sleeping Beauty can be discussed all day. As I said, it's pretty much the star of the show. But animation can't be everything in a film, and Sleeping Beauty is populated with many fun side characters and one of the greatest Disney villains ever put to animation. And sadly, the film ends up failing the most important character of this story, Sleeping Beauty herself, the Princess Aurora. It's been well documented that Princess Aurora is one of the least memorable Disney princesses, and I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. I would never say Aurora is a bad princess. There's just not a lot to her that sets her apart, and that can be disappointing, especially after having one of the best Disney princesses nearly 10 years before with Cinderella. That film really made Cinderella a much more dynamic character than what we had seen previously with Snow White. And sadly, Aurora ends up feeling more like another Snow White than a Cinderella. However, I wouldn't say Aurora is the main star of the film, but I would also argue that Sleeping Beauty doesn't even have a central character. Aurora has about 15 minutes of screen time before she's put under Maleficent's curse, and then the rest of the film moves from side character to side character throughout the film, such as Prince Phillip, who becomes the hero of the film's third act. Then you have the three fairies that more or less work as our main protagonists. They're the characters we tag along with the most, but again, not really main characters and are more there for comic relief, such as the famous banter between Merryweather and Flora as to what the color of Aurora's dress should be. And these characters are fun to see. In fact, I would say Sleeping Beauty has some of my favorite side characters in the Disney canon. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather are fun to watch. Their banter is entertaining and got quite a few laughs out of me. They're fun to be around and are much more interesting as characters than, say, the Seven Dwarfs. I also love the side characters of the two kings. King Stefan and King Hubert are really fun, and when the movie cuts back to them, it's always a treat to see. One of my favorite gags in the film is one of the servants who ends up drinking some of the king's wine and eventually getting drunk off of it. The comedic bits of this film really worked for me, which is funny since I really haven't been able to say that too much with some of the Disney films I've reviewed recently. I also have to give credit where credit is due, and that is that Prince Philip is almost a character in the film. Definitely has lines for once, and plays a much larger role in the story and the third act with him, from his capture by Maleficent's henchmen, which is another fantastic bit of animation as the prince gets wrapped up and you see all the different lines moving around. Incredible work for sure. You have moments like that matched with the epic fight between the dragon and Prince Philip, and it's just thrilling to watch. And from my own recollection, I think this is the first true action scene we've seen in a Disney film, and it's so grand, and I can only imagine what it would have been like seeing this in the theater in 1959. The last character I want to focus on is probably the most memorable one to come out of the film, and that's Maleficent herself. Maleficent is put up there as one of the greatest Disney villains of all time. And to be honest, it's purely based on the design alone. Not to mention the incredible voice performance by Eleanor Audley, who had previously voiced Lady Tremaine in Cinderella. She just has a wickedly great villainous voice that evokes ruthlessness and pure delicious evil. She's a villain that just loves being bad, and the design for her, the slender figure, the angular face, and the horns are just a great disturbing design and call back to some great villainous designs like the Chernenbog from Fantasia. It's perfect design in my eyes. As a villain purely based on looks and performance alone, she is able to carry the film. It's from this that we've gotten so much Maleficent content in recent years, from 2 live-action movies starring Angelina Jolie to books, and most importantly for me, a secondary villain in the Kingdom Hearts series. Maleficent is proof you don't need to be a deeply complex villain to be memorable. You just need the right look and performance, and the rest will come together. Reviews at the time called attention to the weak narrative and characters of Sleeping Beauty, and I would agree to a certain degree that the narrative lacks some of the creativity and magic seen in previous Disney efforts, but I think the narrative still services the story it's trying to tell well, and I think that's what ultimately matters. The characters might lack in depth, but so did characters in previous outings. I think the film at the time was perhaps criticized by the expectations of the time, but I think Sleeping Beauty still manages to give us all the Disney magic we've come to expect, and I think the parts that make the movie really stand out can be appreciated far more now. It would also be a crime if I didn't talk about 2 very important things that make up these early princess films, and those are the intro and outro and the music. Let's look at the intro and outro here, because I feel like I barely touched upon this in earlier reviews. But Sleeping Beauty is much like Cinderella and Snow White. It begins and ends with a live-action moment of a storybook being open and shut. These moments are some of my favorites. It gives the impression of being told an ancient story passed down for generations. It's timeless and works so well in regards to this film in particular, with the beautiful medieval artwork and titles that make you feel transported to that period. And then we have the music. In particular, I'm talking about the soundtrack itself, not really the songs, which are good, but I feel are less memorable overall than previous Disney soundtracks. They lack the imaginative, lyrical beauty of other films, but still shine in their own way, such as with the song Once Upon a Dream, which is the anthem of the film. But no, the soundtrack itself by George Bruns is fittingly romantic, dreamlike, and epic. The calming moments of the earlier portions of the film are contrasted well by the action-packed finale. The film is also eerie during the haunting scene of the possessed Aurora finding the spinning wheels she pricks her finger on, and actually stands out more than the actual songs. Sleeping Beauty is a flawed film, for sure, but its ambitions are so high and the payoff of the animation is truly incredible. Visually, this is one of the best films Disney has ever done and deserves to be up there with Snow White, Bambi, and Lady and the Tramp as a truly monumental moment for animation. But I feel like the mixed reception from the original film's release has hurt it, despite the reevaluation in the years since. The side characters and the villain are also worth the watch, and what we end up having here is a film that can buckle under its own ambition, but it definitely makes for an experience you will never forget. And with all that said, I'm gonna give Sleeping Beauty an 8 out of 10. Sleeping Beauty is an incredible film to experience for its technical levels, and I can see why it might be far from anyone's favorite. But there's a lot to love here, and I'm just happy Disney went there and tried something as big as this, even if it didn't necessarily turn out the way the company had hoped. I could have rated this film lower than I did, but something about it just keeps me going back to it. And I always have a great experience watching it. But anyway, that's all I've got for you. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you've seen Sleeping Beauty, what do you think about it? And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.